as I talk with you today, I wanted to start by talking about basically our current system of agriculture and why growing in cities would make it more sustainable if we are actually growing a substantial amount of food in cities. Secondly, I'd like to take a look at all the spaces from large to small in cities that we have available. And then I'd like to really focus on the indoor spaces in urban environments to talk about potential ways to grow food in them as well. Okay, great. But why talk about growing food in cities at all? I mean, we do have an agriculture system. We have food in grocery stores. We've got farmers markets out there. Why would we need to look for new spaces to grow food? Well, I know that we're all here because we care about food, we care about how it's grown, and a lot of us are concerned about how it's going to be to grow food in the future. Right now, we grow most of our food at large scales in rural areas, and those large fields need water. And as most of our production areas are experiencing major droughts, some of them are finding troubles with enough water. In fact, in California, they're starting to use groundwater to irrigate their crops, so much so that the ground is subsiding in places and actually collapsing a bit and not allowing for future containment of water. And this should be of concern to all of us because California actually produces the majority of many of our fruits and vegetables and nuts here in the US. Actually, according to a recent paper by the National Young Farmers Coalition, 80% of the water that's used here in the western states is used for agriculture. And not just constraints on water. Again, I'm sure we're all very passionate about these issues, and I'm probably not telling you anything that you don't know, but I would like to highlight these. We're also losing arable land. As cities continue to expand, we lose farming land on the edges, and we also lose available land in the interior of cities as density increases. Actually, California lost an average of 50,000 acres per year for the last 30 years of its farmland due to urban sprawl and also energy usage. And then fossil fuels. So fossil fuels are woven into every aspect of farming, so not just transporting things to the farm and transporting food away from the farm, but agricultural production actually comprises 50 to 83% of the fossil fuel usage in agriculture. Also growing at these large scales many times means widespread application of synthetic fertilizers. This leads to runoff and dead zones in adjacent waterways, depriving aquatic life of oxygen, just a cascade of effects. And also concerns that many people have over GMO crops and also widespread pesticide use because of the need to grow and yield at these scales. There's also food waste. So because food needs to be transported from these areas, there are many opportunities for food waste along the transport chain. And in the US, it's estimated that 30 to 40% of our food that is grown goes wasted. And in 2010, that amounted to 133 billion pounds of food, which is hard to imagine. That's a lot of pounds of food, and $161 worth of financial loss. And then, of course, it has to be transported. Every day in America, there are 500,000 of these trucks driving around transporting something edible. And another thing is the fact that we grow most of our food at large scales in rural areas, but 80% of Americans now live in cities. So the food that we eat is transported an average of 1,500 miles. And actually, some say that some statistics point to the fact that only about 4% of the American food market is local crops. As our population continues to increase, this the spatial disconnect between where our food is grown and where we all live is going to expand. Globally, we're projected to reach 9 billion by 2050. And also, right about now, we're at about the halfway point globally of people living in cities, and 70% of people across the world will be living in cities by 2050. But I believe that we can solve this spatial disconnect We have a lot of space around us in cities. It's actually a new resource. Interior spaces will continue to expand, and we have other spaces to utilize. Just starting with the obvious, vacant lots, underused lots. People can start to use these spaces in a city to grow their own food, have some ownership over their food, and also increase their food security. But as has been highlighted recently in Portland, another concern in growing in cities is that you need to know what airborne contaminants and pollutants your food is being exposed to. So while it is good to grow food in these areas, you do need to make sure it's safe. And in more dense regions of the city or near industry, growing outside may be a less viable option. If you have a greenhouse, if you have a backyard, you can put up a greenhouse, which will protect you from those environmental contaminants. And in fact, you don't even have to use soil at all. You can start using recirculating systems if you've got protection for your crops, and therefore reduce your exposure risk to some of the things that we find ourselves exposed to in cities. And then if we look at the expansion of this idea of a greenhouse, I mean, we have large spaces available for greenhouse growing on our rooftops in cities. This is Gotham Greens. It was the first commercial scale rooftop greenhouse in the US in 2010. It actually produces 100 tons of produce annually. They've gone on to make a second greenhouse farm in New York, and then a third here in Chicago. Well, not here in Chicago, here in Chicago. It's about 2 acres of controlled indoor growing space, 2 acres of controlled indoor growing space, which is massive. It's currently the world's largest rooftop farm, and it uses all renewable energy. But I also want to talk today about the opportunities we have for interior spaces and taking advantage of them in cities, because I do believe that, like I said, as cities grow, these are the spaces that are going to become more plentiful. This is an indoor farm in Japan. It was built out of a Sony semiconductor factory. And after the 2011 tsunami and earthquake caused massive food shortages, this factory was built, and they produce 10,000 heads of lettuce a day. It's completely indoors, so it's sheltered from traumatic weather events, drought. It recirculates water, and it's even, not affected by seasonal change. And this particular farm uses 40% less energy, up to 90% less water, and has 80% less food waste than a comparable size soil-based farm. This is another indoor farm. It's called Growing Underground. What was once bomb shelters underneath London is now a space for growing food. And then in the US, we also have some indoor farms to look at. This is Urban Organics. They are operating out of a converted Hams brewery in St. Paul, Minnesota, which is also an insulated building, interesting choice of buildings. But they are not only producing kale and parsley and chard, but because it's an aquaponic farm, they are also producing a source of protein, so in this case, tilapia, right in the city. And aquaponics, for those of you that aren't familiar, it is actually a sustainable growing method that is kind of like an ecosystem. So the fish in the system are providing the nutrients for the plants, and the plants are cleaning the water for the fish. It's a really beautiful system, and it's something that we can use indoors because it doesn't necessitate having soil. Okay, but what about those of us that don't have access to a large factory or perhaps an indoor warehouse? What can we do to start growing food in urban environments? Well, I was thinking about this, and I mean, even really the smallest amount of space that you have, you could live in a tiny apartment. It all kind of begins with the kitchen herb garden, Anybody can do this. You can start, this is growing food in an urban environment. And then you start to look around, and you can see that, you can use the windows in your spaces to actually utilize to grow food. And then you can even further look around, and all that unused space that you had on the walls, all of a sudden you envision putting planters on it. You're thinking about the light in your house and how can you utilize it to grow food. If you have an outdoor space in the city, a small patio, you can even make your own planters very simply to begin starting to grow some food in an urban environment. If you have a covered patio or balcony, as I mentioned, you could have a recirculating system. So in this is an aquaponic system. In this system, there's so much less water used because it's all contained and recirculated. If you have an even larger indoor space, you can start looking at using towers, walls to grow food, large scale in cities. You can even repurpose furniture to grow food. A couple really fun examples here and also here. You just have it really handy right there while you're working. And then, of course, you can repurpose really grand architectural pieces, components as well to start repurposing food, using it as a divider, really beautiful things you can start doing. So looking at the abundance of interior space in urban environments, I set out to figure out how to help people utilize this space to grow food. We make aquaponic systems of different scales for growing in different environments, from offices, restaurants, your house, cafeterias, anything like this that you have space to grow food and you have people that want to eat it. Currently, we're leasing systems like this that are about the size of a bookcase that grow food. These are growing microgreens, so nutrient-dense food in urban areas. And aquaponics is a really good method for this because it does recirculate the water. It can be done indoors, and then we're taking advantage of all the climate-controlled space that we already have, so fewer energy inputs. For the last year, we've been growing microgreens throughout Portland. So microgreens are tiny plants. They're harvested when they're really young, still very small, like kale here. And we're focusing on microgreens because they are so nutrient dense. So depending on the species of plant, they can be up to 40 times more nutrients than the mature plant. And they can be grown in a really small space. This is our commercial system. So we have a commercial space in Southeast Portland where we're growing microgreens for our subscription customers. So it works kind of like a CSA where you pick up a tray every other week of microgreens, and that can last you a couple weeks because our microgreens are given to you while they're still living, and they can continue living. And you can talk more about that with me later if you want. But we're also going to be able to offer these to grocery stores. So we're starting in new seasons and at Woodstock, the Woodstock location, in a couple of weeks. But looking at the commercial opportunities for space, I'm maximizing the space that we do have by growing vertically and looking at ways to take advantage of the different size spaces that we have in urban environments. And in doing that, we can take advantage of many different kinds of spaces. So this, just for example, is the interior of the Red, which is the EcoTrust's planned food hub in Southeast Portland. I mean, just think about what it would be like to have this building full of grow beds growing fresh food, fresh nutritious food right here for people that use it. And looking at the system of food like this, we're able to start trying to decentralize farming. So across a metro area, we could have many small urban farms. You could have, just imagine you could have one in your neighborhood. You go to your neighborhood farm to pick up your greens in your urban area. And then also working with new ideas about transporting food. And if you grow food in a city, you can have it transported fewer miles, and that means you can do interesting things like human-scaled transportation like Beeline does and delivering by tricycle. And then also growing food where you live, and again, this is more and more of us every day, can increase your food security. So reducing very real food fear and anxiety around food availability. So what if the transport chain were to be broken? So right now, if that transport chain between where we grow our food and where most of us live, it was to be severed, most metropolitan areas would run out of food in their grocery stores within a week. And some people think about that and they're concerned about that. So food security would be a real bonus. And also you're not affected as much by drought and things that you can't control. But I also want to mention that maybe the more subtle benefits of having plants and particularly food grown indoors. For one, they offer lots of other benefits. So they clean the air, they're creating oxygen, and they actually provide us with an opportunity to get some of the benefits that have been well documented in recent research about the health benefits of taking part in nature, so being in nature. Why would it be that we get so many benefits out of taking a walk, walking through the forest, that we don't get when we're in a room that doesn't have any greenery? Well, looking at greenery, it makes us relaxed, and this is because our eyes have actually evolved to prefer the fractal patterns that are found in nature. So things like the clouds, patterns of the clouds, trees in a forest. These are the things that we inherently as humans are relaxed by. So we could take advantage of that by having that be in our spaces. Why not take advantage of our evolutionary background and have the benefits of growing food in our environments? There also could be other benefits, on a larger scale, on a building scale. Plants could be used to shade the housing. Latent heat could be stored in fish tanks. All kinds of possible benefits, excuse me, from growing indoors. Pardon me. So we talked a little bit today about the food system and how to make it more resilient by growing food in urban areas. Pardon me. And then about the spaces that we have from small to large in cities. I'm going to need to grab water in just a second. And then also the importance of growing indoors. So indoors is a special type of growing that would take advantage of not only climate control buildings, but also be able to not be affected by dramatic climate change and also weather events. It can use renewable energy, and it produces food right where people live. I believe if we start to weave production of food into our city's infrastructure, then we can all build a more resilient and healthier future, which I'm really excited about. And I invite you to look around today when you're here at FoodWorx, or actually when you're anywhere. Thanks so much. I appreciate it. It's funny how that happens. And we all need water too. So we need food and we need water. But just take a second and look around. I mean, even in this room, we do have tremendous opportunity in terms of space to grow food. And that's what I'd like to leave you with today, is to think about these ideas of how can we integrate growing food into the spaces we live in urban environments. And I'd like to really thank you all for the opportunity for speaking with you today. And I really hope to speak with many of you today. We have a booth over in the exhibitor area. I'd love to talk with you further about all of these ideas and find out what you're doing with the future of food. Thank you so much.
Thank you.